primary election coming up. No matter what side you're on, Republican, Democrat, whatever, you know, when the history of the United States is that one of our most important rights is to be able to vote. Well, okay, we vote, but then what about, does our vote count, right? And that's what we're really thinking of here. So we're going to have like analysis tonight by Brent as to, for us, particularly in San Francisco, what's going on with voting and, you know, the technical side.
Well, stray markings would be because when you let the voter touch the ballot with a crayon or a pen.
I think we're all used to the ballot in San Francisco, right? Everyone's done it? Can you explain from, I understand what a stray marking means, but,
I don't understand.
well,
It's like
if
you
you
don't go
hit the
exactly in
page,
the.
Right, so there's a rejection rate.
there's a high rejection rate because
Yes.
how precise is it that that line has to be?
Well, I think it's subject to the scrutiny of the election officials. So if they eyeball it and it's not to their liking, they'll
Okay,
remake it.
We take a ballot here, I do it here, this was my precinct, I don't know where it's gonna be this year. And you mark it, and you bring it out to a machine,
Yes.
and it goes into a machine. Does it do any, does that machine do anything to it?
Well, it could. It could. So if there is any discrepancy, that's where you get into the remaking of the ballots. And if it's rejected, then it will be remade. That's my understanding.
Okay.
It's a tabulator, the machine.
Yeah, it's a
Yes.
It
It's
actually provides an
Of
initial.
just,
Yes.
does it tabulate just how many people have put in a ballot, or does it tabulate the votes as read off
Because
of
the
a
votes,
sheet?
if you go to the precincts on election night, they actually list, you can get no preliminary analysis.
Of
So-
who voted for?
Exactly.
But
For every-
who
I
got-
can't believe that that many are redone because they wouldn't have the results out by 10 o'clock at
A
night.
small percentage because they get damaged, and so a large
Well, you
percentage.
said a majority of them.
Well, I will say a larger majority than you might think.
A small.
Okay, and
Yes.
then what, so then the paper ballots that end up in the machine, right, I think, where do they go?
They retrieve them and they give them to the.
They pull them
police.
out of the machine, those are kept.
Yes.
Are they reviewed? And now it goes to your question, what are these remade ballots? That I don't understand. If you have a hard copy that someone else has done, what's the necessity of redoing them?
Well, that's a good question. And of course, the answer is that the systems themselves are cobbled together. And so from a technology perspective and a design perspective, they're not ideal. And that's what results in the rejection rate. And that's something, of course, that we want to provide solution to as well, because that's just one issue that is on the table. The other one is, even if it does go through properly and it's not remade, what is happening internally with the vote count? And that is the more problematic issue, in my opinion, because even if everything does go as planned, you still don't have proper oversight of the counting process, because you're not allowed to see the tabulation software. So in that, we not only want the system to be working at a better rate.
So San Francisco system has a proprietary software that no one can see the
That's
underlying
correct.
code to.
That's correct.
What, one question then you can ask, from what you described, there are roadblocks from the White House to the local county, right? I thought the states made the law about elections and whatnot, and why can't the state just say every county will take this is how you have to, the machine or the code, say you get your wish, like I think we would all have the wish that we have this open source code, works. I would like you to explain at some time what the disability considerations are, because I'm not so sure what those mean. But why is it, I mean, you said before it's not rocket science. They've made it more difficult than getting to the moon.
Right,
Yeah.
that's absolutely correct. So the state recently, thanks to then Senator Alex Padilla, put forth a Senate bill, SB 360, that recognized the difficulties on the federal level regarding the certification process. there was a fellow by the name of Roy Saltman that was known as the father of the certification process we talked about. And Roy became aligned with our work to say the certification process is broken. The vendors figured out how to manipulate the testing labs and also manipulate the secretaries of state in that, for instance, ES&S, one of the major vendors, was caught by then Secretary of State Deborah Bowen having one secret proprietary software sample in escrow, what they call escrow, and Shirley knows escrows are good in real estate, but they're not so good in elections. So they had one code in the escrow account, but a different code out in the field running the machines. This highlights some of the issues, and for that they were fined, but of course the fine is nothing in comparison to their $4.5 billion take. So the state at that point passed SB 360, then Senator Padilla's bill, which said California can now certify its own technology and its own voting systems. That was basically done, piggybacked on the work of the fellow I mentioned, Alan Deckert, to say we should be in control of our own technology, and we felt like that was the catalyst to create the California Association of Voting Officials to say it's time to move in this open source direction. So yes, the state does have a major say-so, as does the EAC on the federal level. The EAC was problematic and is now getting somewhat functional on the federal level. So you have some federal interplay, the state, and then again, the counties as a real power. So you have to go, which we've done on an education campaign throughout the 58 counties, to make sure that they are clear that this option is available, and when it comes into their purchasing cycle, they can opt for these types of open source systems, because it is a patchwork quilt of different systems throughout the 58 counties. What we would advocate is uniformity throughout the 58 states and throughout the United States, so that basically there was one type of system that we could all participate in, and it would be available information to all jurisdictions and great interoperability. These are some of the key components to utilizing open source.
What keeps open source from getting hacked? What
Yes.
can manipulate that more easily than you could something proprietary?
Well, that's not true, that you could do it more easily, but certainly your point is well taken.
Isn't the idea of open source is not only that can you look at it, but you can use it to suit your needs?
That's correct. So as the Department of Defense has encountered and utilized open source now, so they're using it for their mission critical, which is something I point to when getting into this conversation. The security by obscurity method of security is a failed concept, because the hacker will hack. So the idea is to have the source code available for inspection. So the words open source are almost a bit of a misnomer and creates a bit of counterintuitive thought, because it's not open to manipulation, because there's security procedures surrounding it that lock it down, certainly before an election, but upon its creation, it can be created by the community of open source technologists who are, I don't want to say ego-driven, but certainly they have fun one-upping each other to show who the smartest person in the world is, or the room, and they like pointing out any bugs that may be there. So you've got two choices. Either you're going to have a code that is closed, that comes from a small group of people that, let's face it, might be wise guys, corrupted in some way, or you have the entire worldwide community putting a robust code together, and then at that point, you have the security procedures surrounding the code that lock it down. So the fact that it's open to inspection does not mean open to tampering once it's actually in a form that's going to be utilized within a voting system.
Who are the security people?
Well, the security people that are associated with the California Association of Voting Officials, which is my group, are people that were around Richard Stallman during the inception, creation of open source. So I rely on a few different security experts. One in particular is a fellow by the name of Brian Fox, who did some online banking systems. He was also the creator of what's called the Bash Shell, and you can look at his work and his CV at cavo-us.org, California Association of Voting Officials website. And so he's a person I rely on, as he's done, like I have, pro bono work for over a decade on this, so I believe he's vetted to a good extent, enough for me to value his opinion. The fact is that by having a large group of participants, which is the mantra of open source, if someone has an opinion that is errant, the rest of the large group tends to call bullshit on the bad opinion and say, hey, this is funky, your opinion is wrong. Then of course it's a consensus approach where they work it out. Now, does that result in a lot of heated arguments? Yes, but in the end, the code that is developed is a more robust code, and that's why I believe the Department of Defense is now utilizing open source for their mission criticals. And again, no situation is ever 100% secure. Even in the open source world, there's been an issue with a bug called Heartbleed, which was buried deep within a code. And a lot of proprietary people said, aha, there is now a bug in your open source, so neener, neener. Well, the response to that is, at least we know it's there and it can be addressed. Under the opposition scenario of Microsoft, which is obviously renowned for being Bundy, it's there and you never will know. And it's a small group of controllers that are basically saying, trust us, it's okay. Well, I think it's stipulated at this point that we don't want faith-based election system software. It's preferable to have an open, transparent methodology. And if somebody happens to be able to get a bug somewhere in there, which I would contest is unlikely just because of the foundational principles, at least you're in a position to say, what's that doing there? So that's the idea and the difference between the security by obscurity concept and the open source concept.
One last thing, in your opinion, why would Daryl Isis be interested in open source?
I have to say, Daryl Isa, not ISIS. That's a funny one. No, but
Or Scott Wiener.
just because I at least owe him that, as he, did do a good deed. Why would he be interested? I think he's a technologist, and I think he is a patriot. So no matter what we might think of his politics and his positions, I think somewhere in there, in his heart, he realizes that, this is a game that's been played. The vendors have got the country in a vendor trap, and there's better technology that is better for the country, and I think he just called them on it. And for that, I think he gets a star. Now for the rest, I don't know how the balance is there, but everybody can figure that out themselves. But yes, that's my feeling on how that happened. It was, an unusual moment, but because again, I happen to be a Democrat, but we took it, and we also realized that, corruption and corruption fighters come on both sides of the aisle. So there are people that are affected by Microsoft and others everywhere, and internationally too. I think if you study it, you'll see that Microsoft has been dinged many a time for reaching out and touching politicians. So,
Would you explain the disability before we?
Yes.
Considerations that.
this is a system called the Prime 3, has been developed by one of our board members, a fellow by the name of Dr. Juan Gilbert, who's currently a professor at the University of Florida. And Dr. Gilbert stood on the shoulders of others that have done some of this work, but really perfected a system called the Prime 3, or the All for One system, and this was deployed in New Hampshire for their primary. Dr. Gilbert is a great person, in my opinion, that did a lot of the hard work with, I think, some of his students being utilized, and developed a system that had the sip and puff, the audio, all the bells and whistles that are desired by the disabilities community. And so it is still a work in progress, but he got it to the point where it was able to be deployed in New Hampshire, and now it will be deployed. I think they did it on an incremental basis initially for the primary in just some jurisdictions, and now they're going to go statewide with it for the general. So that's a great moment in open source history, and of course we have to have that in order so that basically every voting station will have disabilities components. And of course, some people think that eventually there will be, once we have proper foundation in place, there will be the ability for the disabled to vote from their own home and not have to go anywhere, maybe even use an Android smartphone to cast their ballot, and then be able to verify their ballot through their phone. And that is something being worked on by a group right now called Follow My Vote. But understand that there is tremendous pushback to anything that rattles the status quo, and I protest that some of this pushback, even though it supposedly comes from the scientific community, some of the pushback comes from what I coined the faux, F-A-U-X, scientific community that really may be more aligned with the status quo, Microsoft, Silicon, and there's another bag of worms to be analyzed. But slowly but surely, we're getting there, and the initial step for us is making sure that there is open source at the poll sites and in the central tabulators in the tabulation process. So if you're for vote by mail and you're for paper ballots, and this is what we're doing now, at least we have the ability to count the votes with transparency, and that is an appropriate security environment.
Bravo to the effort that you're doing. What seems like a knot that will last for a bit is, it reminds me of the PUC issue. It's the county level issue in which there has been a long relationship between vendor and the officials, the county level officials. Even if all of the state pieces fall into place, is there a way, or is there another part of your organization that is trying to wedge them apart so that the officials and the choices they make can be free of the vendor gifts, shall we say?
That is exactly the purpose of the California Association of Voting Officials. It was created in order to put in motion a vehicle so that the counties could pool resources together, those that wanted to initially. We have 15 member counties right now. Unfortunately, we don't have any of the larger counties in the state of California, and we are hopeful And one of our asks in front of the San Francisco board is that San Francisco, as they are ostensibly moving toward an open source system, that they join Kavo. This would allow myself and others to go and reach out to other major counties and say, look, you don't have to be afraid of these vendors. The vendors are known, and we have it on record from a county election official that told us that one of the major vendors said to her, if you promote open source, maybe I just won't answer your phone when you call me for service right before an election. So that kind of threat has already been tendered and noted, that it's a bad position. Now, for me, if I was a county elections official and a vendor said that, that would make me want to get away from them sooner rather than later. It wouldn't lock me in further. It would drive me away. So we tell that story freely, knowing that the source is reputable and we understand the dynamic of the relationship. And to answer your question, that is the purpose of Kavo. Now, Senator Ben Allen was having a hearing the other day, and some supposed good governance groups were in front of him. And he asked the question, is there a good governance group out there that is focused on the pooling of county resources? And even though the people providing information to the senator knew the answer, they all were silent when he asked the question, which made my head turn different shades of green and purple and almost pop off my shoulders. So at that point, I contacted all the senators involved in the Senate elections community and said to them, I believe we should be proceeding with sworn testimony moving forward, because I just saw some large people groups that are getting a lot of grant money and sucking all the air out of the room. When you ask them a point blank question, they didn't give you an honest answer. So let us provide sworn testimony, proceed with sworn testimony, maybe penalty of perjury. I don't know exactly how it moves forward, but the fact is there's a lot of groups out there raising money off the issue of elections and taking grant monies in the millions of dollars. And so far, we haven't seen results like we should. So we're very sensitive to that issue as well. And Little Kavo is always fighting for position amongst these other groups that are very cozy with the officials. So this is part of the problem at hand.
Yeah.
John?
Great work.
Question?
Thanks for all of your efforts in this arena. The problems with our elections are so broad, from voter suppression, requirements for ID, the handling of absentee ballots. I'm just curious, how will this solution address, most of the ballots that are remade in the registrar's office are absentee ballots that Democrats in particular like to be very creative with their ballots. They can't just check, Obama, they've got to draw happy faces and do all these circles and figures.
Lizard
A
people.
lot of the ballots, it's usually absentee ballots that are damaged. And you can look at the Secretary of State has a report, and it's a few percent. It's usually because people are just being too artistic. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, I applaud all of your efforts. I'm just wondering, we use the Edge machine for disabled voters here. We use the Insight Tabulator. How does your efforts combine with all the existing efforts? How are precincts redesigned? How are they handling chain of custody of absentee ballots as well? You understand what I'm saying?
Well, we are certainly interested in upgrading all the procedures that we deem deficient at this point. And it's arguable what they are and that, but we think there's improvements that should be made to the handling of the absentees and other aspects of the entire process. But the idea is to take it from beginning to end. Our initial focus is what I've mentioned here tonight. The other parts that perhaps could be upgraded, like you mentioned, are secondary to us. We're not interested in telling people how to vote. If they want to vote by absentee ballots, even though there is a chain of custody issue inherent to handing it to your mail person, so ideally, the entire process would happen in a closed environment, and there would not be ballots transported around through the mail. But understanding that there is a trend, we believe also that that particular trend of vote by mail is part and parcel to the cost issue, and the issue of cost we address. So in fact, there may be an effect of saving the precinct style of voting by lessening the costs with our technology. That being said, if people want to vote by mail, that's okay. And the idea is eventually technology will step in and provide some more availability and solution there. But at least if when the ballot arrives at the central tabulator, if it could be counted at that point on a appropriately secure system, that would be a major win. And if we could get it to the point where there were not stray hand markings causing rejection rates on the ballots, that would be great. If the voter could print their ballot out at home and it was perfectly printed, very much akin to our solution at the precinct level, that I think would be great. Now, there are arguments to be made and adaptations to be made, and I don't think it's set in stone exactly how it should or would be, but that's sort of my take on it at this point. And it should be a complete system that is put out to the public. Los Angeles County has done a lot of this work with taking the issues to the public and getting response from the disabilities community, from the general public. I think that can be utilized by San Francisco, so we don't have to go through all those steps again.